Well, we're back. Still talking about how to develop your research idea or research proposal, and we're at the point in our conversation where we're talking about how you might want to formulate hypotheses. Quite simply, a hypothesis is the tentative answer to your research question. It's a statement that you could make in answer to your research question. And you'll typically state specific hypotheses that you have developed from your literature review. So you'll have a broad question that in many cases will come from your lit review, but you'll also have some statements in response to that question based on what your literature review suggests that you can make, or what your theoretical framework suggests that you can make. In quantitative research, a hypothesis is typically the researcher's prediction of the relationship that exists among the variables being investigated. So for the quantitative research question that I asked in the last screencast, what effect does playing football have on students' overall grade point average during the football season? A related hypothesis might sound like this. Students who play football during the football season will experience a decrease in their GPAs as compared to students not playing football. Or you could say that there is a negative relationship between playing football and student GPA. Those are both ways of saying that, stating that hypothesis. But unlike in quantitative research, where hypotheses are stated before you collect the data and analyze the data, and you really test the hypotheses with a quantitative approach, hypotheses in qualitative research are often generated as the data are collected and as the researcher gains insight into what is being studied. So it's the difference between being inductive and deductive, right? In one version, you're actually making a statement, making your hypothesis statement, and then testing whether or not that is true by collecting data and analyzing it. And the other one, you're asking a broad research question, and then you're collecting data and analyzing it, and developing your statement as you become more informed by the data, right? So they're both good ways of getting at your question and formulating hypotheses, but they serve sort of different purposes. They have different approaches. So let's just talk about some general suggestions about hypotheses. Excuse me. One is that these statements should be written in carefully constructed language that specifies each variable in explicit terms. You want to specify the variables as explicitly as possible because, especially in quantitative research, when you state your hypothesis, you want the variables that you're talking about to be immediately recognizable as something that is operationalized and empirically observable. Second, you want to state them in formal terms that are appropriate to the intended design and analysis of the data to be employed. For example, I just gave an example on the previous slide, and I said one way you could state the hypothesis for the playing football student GPA question would be to say that there is a negative relationship between a student's status, playing football status, and their GPA. Well, what does that tell us? That tells us that we're looking for an association. That's a correlation coefficient or a correlation analysis. Or you could, if you're looking at gender performance in science, you could say that girls, 8th grade girls, perform higher on science assessments than boys in Saudi Arabia. Right? That, my friends, is a t-test because you are looking at the difference in means on a particular variable between two groups. If you were looking at the difference between more than two groups, it would be an ANOVA, an analysis of variance. You see where I'm going with this? You're trying to, once you know the different designs, the different kinds of analyses that you can conduct, specifically from a statistical point of view, you can state your hypotheses in a way that lend themselves directly to those designs. You want to display in logical order all subsections of the research topic. This means that you might have more than one hypothesis that you're stating, even though you only have one, maybe larger research question that you're asking. And so the hypotheses will help you build a case. So maybe you want to state, first of all, I want to see if there's a difference between boys and girls' science achievement. Right? That would be your first hypothesis. And then your second hypothesis might be something more about why girls perform higher than boys. But it's maybe a conditional relationship. I'll only investigate hypothesis 2 if hypothesis 1 is confirmed. Right? Logical order. So hypotheses both indicate the question in testable form and they predict the nature of the answer. And you should always accompany every hypothesis with a paragraph, especially in your proposal if you're doing hypotheses up front for quantitative research. Accompany them with a paragraph explaining what it means and how that hypothesis ties back to the problem, the purpose, the question, and your rationale or your theoretical framework. Right? You can't just sort of state it and then let it hang there. There has to be something more than that. So how do we put all of this together? We've sort of run through in these previous screencasts the topic, the problem, the purpose, and the question, and then we just talked about hypotheses for your research idea or proposal. So we need to now put them together. We need to make some sense, and you need to think of what your idea is and articulate that. Well, that's where we use, or I use, and you can use it too, something called the elements of a research proposal. And it's simply a way of stating whatever it is that you need to state about your research idea in a simple format that is as direct or clear as possible. And you can do this all at once. You could write this down and then go back to it, or you could do it with me as we move along through this and just pause it when you need to pause it so that you have time to think. The first thing you want to do is state the problem. Okay? I'm going to use my example from gender differences in math and science education in Saudi Arabia, because that's an example I use all the time. Statement of the problem. Simply say the problem is that, and then tell us what it is. So in my case, the problem is that there's a possibility for different educational opportunity and experience when school systems are gender separated. That's my problem. When there are boys and girls separated in school, there is evidence that there's the potential for discrimination against one of those groups, either against boys or against girls, or that there is a problem that would be a lack of opportunity for one of those groups, right? So I've just given you a longer explanation, but I started with a one-sentence statement. Was it a beautiful statement? No, it was a little choppy. Can it be revised? Yes. Are you trying to write the perfect statement right off the bat? No. This is a way to get your ideas down. There is always a revision process, always. So put your ideas down and then go back and revise. Next, in light of this problem, I ask, do boys and girls in Saudi Arabia perform differently on standardized tests of science achievement? I just want to find that out. Now, is that a great question? Does that ask how or why? No, not really. So how might I revise that? Because remember, I'm just getting things down and then I'm coming back and revising. Well, I could revise that by taking a look at some of the previous literature that has shown quite clearly that girls outperform boys by a significant amount on math and science achievement tests in Saudi Arabia at the 8th grade level. And I could say, in light of this problem, I ask, why do girls outperform boys in Saudi Arabia? Yeah, that would be maybe a little too simple. Why do girls in the 8th grade outperform boys on science achievement tests in Saudi Arabia? Right? So you can play with it, but you want to make one statement of your question. Write it down in light of this problem I asked, then take time later to go back and tweak it. Previous answers to this question have been, and this is when I can maybe get a little more lengthy in my response, because there are several reasons why the research has suggested this might be happening. One, it could be that girls have more opportunities better curriculum, that they are treated differently. It could also be, and those would all be school-based answers, right? There'd be school factors that are somehow playing a role here. And that's how I might group that in my literature review. I might synthesize all those together as school factors. But I could also talk about social factors. There are social factors involved, and there's research that makes an argument that how boys and girls perform in school is determined by how much opportunity they have outside of school, in the labor market, in society, in the family, wherever. That's called the opportunity structure. So the previous answers have been school factors provide more opportunities for girls than boys. Other research has shown that the opportunity structure that exists in society, in the labor market, in politics, outside of the school, tends to influence how well girls do in school, meaning that girls might have more opportunities in the school system than they do outside. These are previous answers. Theoretical approach. I think the answer to this question is, and then because. Well, I think the answer to the question actually is the social context thing. I think the answer to the question is that the social context limits girls' opportunities outside of school because of the way that it's set up, the tradition, the culture, the history in the region. And as a result, girls tend to perform more highly in schools because that's where the opportunity structure really exists for girls. That's a lengthy answer. It doesn't exactly follow the format that I've laid out here, but that's my answer. And I can revise that to sound better. So my propositions are hypotheses. My answer to the question can be summarized in this statement or these statements. And this is where I would say, why I think something exists. This is going to take a little more thought than maybe some of the others, especially if you're new to thinking about it. You want to go back and reflect on what your question was, and then you want to think about how would I answer that in a statement. In order to test these statements, I will use, in my case, I'm going to use the Trends in International Math and Science Study data for Saudi Arabia that comes from 2011. That's very specific. I happen to have a data set ready to go. You might have another data set that you want to use. I also might indicate the variables that I'm interested in using. I'm going to use science achievement. There's no doubt about that. I'm going to use gender. Right, whether or not they're male or female. I'm going to use some other control variables as well that I think would be important that have to do with opportunity structure within the schools and outside of the schools to the degree that I can. Right, so you can start thinking about how are you going to actually test the statements? What data are you going to use? How are you going to do it? From this data, I will derive these measures, and I've just given you some examples, the gender one, the student achievement one, the background characteristics. And then using this data and these measures, I will conduct the following analyses for the stated purposes. This is when I'm going to do a t-test between boys and girls, horrible handwriting, sorry, to see if there's a significant difference, and I will confirm that one exists. I'm going to try to correlate my opportunity structure variables with my gender variables and my achievement variables. And then finally, I'm going to conduct a hierarchical linear model analysis where I look at contextualized regression equations. Right? That's just a specialized type of statistical analysis that I tend to use. Finally, I'm going to talk about what my anticipated results and findings are. I think that the results of my initial, or if I have this data, prior analyses are, and then you state it. I expect my final analyses to find, maybe you just want to find that your hypotheses are confirmed. If you have something else in mind, write it down. And then finally, if this is accurate, then this suggests that there really is a significant connection, in my case, between social structure and opportunity outside of the schools and what happens inside schools. If you can put all these elements together, you have a nice start on your research proposal, and you'll be able to move forward, I think, relatively quickly.